This is the Physical Activity Researcher Podcast, a podcast for researchers of sedentary behavior, physical activity, and sports. Join for a relaxed dialogue about research design, practicalities, and, well, anything related to research. Learn from your fellow researchers useful and relevant information that does not fit into formal content and limited space of scientific publications. And here is your host, researcher and entrepreneur, Olli Tikkanen.
Welcome everyone. As a listener of this podcast, you probably know very well the importance of being active throughout the day. The challenge is just how to actually get it done in a busy daily life, and a static standing has also its own downsides. There might be a solution for you, a treadmill desk from Germany called Walkalution. What is a treadmill desk? In short, a workstation that allows you to walk slowly while you work at your desk. But in Walkalution's case, it is treadmill without the motor, so it's silent and you decide the speed as you are the engine of the treadmill. It also has sliding integrated desk and backrest, so you can have several different postures and can avoid overloading parts of the body for extended periods of time. At least for me, different activities and postures just fit better with certain work tasks, and Walkalution enables natural flow between postures. I've been testing the treadmill myself and it simply delivers. Every detail is thought through. So I'm glad as we can now offer Walkalution desk treadmill for the listeners of this podcast with 10% discount. To get the discount, use the code SITLESS, one word written together, in the store of walkalution.com. That is written walk as in walking and illusion like the second part of revolution or evolution. And now it's time for the introduction of the guest of today's episode. We have a great guest for this episode. She's working as a lecturer in workplace health and well-being in the Department of Health Research at Lancaster University. Earlier she has been in postdoctorate role at Swansea University. She is an interdisciplinary mixed method researcher, and her research expertise is in workplace physical activity and sedentary behavior intervention, development, and evaluation. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our guest, Abigail Morris. Welcome, Abigail.
Hi, Olli. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you in the show. So, would you like to tell about your academic journey this far?
Yes, sure. So I took my undergraduate degree back in 2012. I was a little bit late to the game and took a few years after my A-levels before I went into academia. I studied sport and exercise science, which I really, really enjoyed. And during that program, took an interest in both the performance and the elite side, but also with community-based health projects as well. So I took opportunities to take placements throughout my undergraduate degree, and I really enjoyed both aspects, but what really stood out to me was interventions that could really help to change and help people make improvements to their health behaviours. So that kind of followed in with my dissertation title and things like that. And then following my undergraduate degree, I got a position at Burnley Football Club with their community programme. So I was a health and wellbeing officer there. So this wasn't an academic role in any way, but it was really based within community programmes and projects, looking at improving health and wellbeing and delivering interventions. So I did that for a while until the opportunity for the PhD came along, which was still within intervention development and health promotion, behaviour change. But it was very much on the other end of the spectrum in terms of designing and then evaluating interventions as well. So I just thought I'd really would love to grasp that opportunity to take that one step further. And I took my PhD at Liverpool John Moores University, started that in 2016. And as you said, it was a mixed methods PhD as well. So I had a fantastic supervisor, Dr. Lee Graves, who supported me through, but also put me in touch with lots of opportunities for teaching, conferences, and put me in touch with some advisors from Leicester University, Charlotte Edwardson, and even internationally with Genevieve Healy over in Australia. So it's just been a fantastic opportunity. And then since it's led on to postdoctorate research at Swansea for 6 months post, and then up to Lancaster again. So I've come full circle from my academic journey from starting in Lancaster and coming back to Lancaster. So I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, that's an interesting story, and I actually didn't know that you have been in John Moores, because I was staying in Liverpool for I think 2019 and 18 and maybe 16. I don't know. We have might even met in the Ship and Mitre pub sometime. I don't remember if we have met.
Oh, potentially, yeah. It's definitely an infamous pub. If you've been to Liverpool John Moores University, you will know of that establishment.
Yeah. So you said that you worked in the community project before starting your PhD. How did you like it, and what do you feel that you learned from that experience?
Yeah, I really liked the variety of the programs that we delivered. So we did schools-based programs, going into year 5s and 6s and teaching them about diet, physical activity, doing like practical and theory sessions, and they really engaged with that. And then we worked with different workplaces doing health checks, men's health programs. So getting people together, working together, and noticing changes, albeit a lot of the time was more anecdotal. They were evaluated programs, but not to the same level as an academic evaluation as such. So I really like the variety and the application and working with people to deliver the interventions, and you get to know them, you get to work with them over weeks. And being in the area that it was, Burnley as well, is quite a deprived area. So the impact of the football stadium and the programs within the community, I think, were really, really important.
And you did you all the time want to start the PhD, or did you figure it out while doing this work?
It's a good question, actually, because I never considered myself to be an academic, and I didn't ever anticipate when I did my undergraduate degree that I would be sat here now with a PhD and a lectureship at Lancaster University. So it was something I was interested in, and I when the opportunity came up, the PhD title and the project title, it was already in place, but it was something that was really resonated with me as well. So I knew that if I was to take on a PhD program, it would be something that I had to be passionate about, because you take it on, it's for a minimum of 3 years. You've got to be passionate about it at the beginning because it's quite intense. So it came along, and it was an opportunity to progress myself professionally and personally. So I thought I'd take it up.
Yeah. And about your PhD, could you tell about how was your study design and what were the main findings?
So it was based on the MRC framework in terms of developing a complex intervention. So that follows a 4-stage process. In terms of the first stage is very much developmental. The second stage is piloting and feasibility stage. The third stage is evaluation. And then the fourth stage is wider implementation. So the scope of my PhD program didn't quite get around the full circle of the MRC framework by any means. So it was really focused towards developing an understanding of the setting and the context in the first phase. So my first PhD program study was very much qualitative, and I was looking at sort of the barriers and facilitators within call and contact centres, and looking at the factors influencing their ability to be physically active and the things influencing high volumes of sedentary behaviour. So this was taking kind of a holistic approach as well, and not just talking to the employees themselves, but the team leaders and the senior team leaders within that establishment, to try and get this kind of broad picture of the setting and to inform the development of future intervention strategies. So that phase 2 then was a feasibility trial to move on. It's more of a like iterative process, but to kind of build upon the factors that we've identified and then trial whether that's feasible within the setting itself. And then the third study that I did was, again, building on from that. It was still a pilot phase, but it was introducing a an intervention arm for comparison as well. So very much following that framework model from the MRC framework.
Sounds like an interesting project. So you were actually having people from the call centers, and you were collaborating with the managers there. How was it to collaborate? I think call center work, it's quite intensive work that you on the phone all the time. How easy was it to decrease the sedentary time, and how was it working in this environment?
Yeah, absolutely. It is a tricky environment to work with, but even more so the reason to try to have an impact on the sedentary behaviour and physical activity. So, if you're not aware of call centres, they've been referred to as battery kind of operations. Yeah, it is very intensive, and they don't have a very much autonomy or choice over what jobs they do. It's very much taking call after call after call. So some of the challenges were built around those physical restraints. They weren't physically able to break up their sitting time during the working day to just, walk to get some water or fill up the kettle or break it up in that way. And so we had to look around strategies to build upon opportunities for when they could do that within the day, but also introducing, so we had height adjustable workstations for the pilot and feasibility trials. So they allowed workers to be able to continue to work, to continue to answer telephone calls, because important consideration obviously is that we don't dip in productivity and we don't have a negative impact on those productivity metrics. And they're really key for businesses and establishing business buy-in as well. So that was one of the main factors, was being able to provide the height adjustable workstations. But that's not always possible because they obviously incur a cost if you're going to look to scale those kind of interventions up. So we looked at different intervention strategies, such as raising awareness through education sessions, individual feedback, some goal setting, and self-monitoring techniques as well. So trying to build in those multiple components that allowed people to be more aware of the behaviours and then try to integrate practical strategies within their working day.
And so you were looking in the first stage, you were looking qualitatively the barriers and facilitators. It would be interesting to hear what kind of things you found and how much there was social norms and other things preventing activity.
Yeah, absolutely. And those social norms are really prevalent, actually, and that was one of the key themes that came out. So I looked at it across the socio-ecological model. So we're looking at a workplace like an onion as such. So there's lots of layers involved within a workplace setting, as any behaviour, but within the workplace setting particularly. So we have organisational factors, such as some of the policies and job roles allow people to sit at their desks at lunchtime and to eat their lunch. So there was no need for people to even break away during those break times to even stand up to move to a canteen or a different location. So there were certain local workplace policies that actually restricted that movement or allowed people to just maintain their sedentary behaviour throughout the day. Some of the practices were geared towards more of a treatment approach. So there were strategies in the 4 contact centres where people would be given a height adjustable workstation, for example, but only on the basis of a display screen equipment assessment, or if someone had a chronic health condition or musculoskeletal problem already in place, rather than approaching it from more of a preventative angle. And obviously from an organisational perspective, there was a big need to justify a return on investment. And there was a big worry within the team leaders and senior team leaders that any strategies to encourage their workers to sit less and to move more would have a negative impact on productivity output. So there was that big kind of conflict there. Some of the cultural factors as well, it was very much just perceived as, you come in to work, you come in and sit down, and that's how you go about your day. So there was a big culture around the practices that happened within the workplace. But team leaders were seen from all people that I interviewed and spoke with as really pivotal in in terms of how they could shape and influence behaviour, and they could act as role models, and they could really help to G up their teams and motivate their teams to sit less and move more. I've already mentioned some of the environmental restrictions in terms of their connection to the workplace and their job roles themselves, but actually having to be connected to their computers for up to 90% of their day. So there was many factors, which makes it quite complex, but a very interesting setting as well to work with.
Yeah, so there was quite a bit of norms and factors against avoiding sedentary behavior. How did you go about changing these norms and changing the workplace culture?
So within the intervention strategies that we developed, we tried to build in the team, like the team leader role. We try to recruit people within teams within the first feasibility trial as well. So to try and really build upon that social element. If they're doing it, it becomes more of an acceptable behavior in the workplace. If your colleague's breaking up their sitting time, it's perceived then as potentially less strange or disruptive. So we built in team leader strategies where they could talk to their participants or during team meetings and one-to-one meetings, encourage them to conduct one-to-one meetings either standing or walking where possible, if there was no confidential information being talked about. And then we also built in weekly email strategies as well, so prompts and reminders to help, because a lot of our behaviour is very much habitual. So these prompts and weekly reminders help remind agents about kind of health risks of spending too much time sitting down and the benefits of breaking up their sitting time frequently.
And how was the process like? You said that the team leaders were kind of bringing example, and there was a social element. Was there a clear threshold or occasion when the things started to change or change drastically, or was it a gradual process all the way?
For the intervention elements, do you mean?
Yeah, I mean, like with the sedentary behavior, that did you see that, for example, nobody was standing up for the first 2 months, but after something happened, then it started to change more drastically? Like, I mean, just in the sedentary behavior.
Oh, I see. So in the second trial, in the feasibility trial, it was delivered over 8 weeks. So there was the people that used the height adjustable desks. There was almost like this novelty factor. Oh, it's a new desk, it's a new piece of equipment, and it's something novel to do within the workplace. So what we typically see, not just in my interventions, but in other workplace interventions, is that there's a big uptake, and there's a big reduction in sedentary behaviour in the first instance, and then over time that change slowly and gradually goes back or reduces over time. So I did notice that in the first feasibility trial, there within 8 weeks, yes, there was a reduction in sitting behaviour, and in my third trial as well. So there was a reduction in sitting time at 3 months and then at 10 months. So this was a 10-month intervention, and importantly, there was a reduction in prolonged sitting periods, not just at 3 months, but at 10 months as well. So we're looking at how well these behaviours can be sustained over time. So one of the important things that I found from the third study was that rather than delivering a 3-month intervention and then stopping all intervention strategies and then evaluating again at the next follow-up, was that we delivered an intensive phase intervention and then had more of a maintenance phase. So there were still ongoing intervention strategies that were being delivered, but not as intensive. And this was almost like a handover to kind of then individuals taking up the behaviour as the norm. And this was replicated in Charlotte Edwardson's study, actually, who found that there was a sitting reduction initially, and then actually this was increased at 12 months. So you don't tend to see it in a sitting reduction increase over time. So that was really positive.
Let's have a short break into interview and think about the way we work. You might be walking or going about your daily course when listening to this podcast episode. But when working on a computer, we are easily stuck to static positions, whether sitting or standing. Wouldn't it be nice if you could take steps as you like? There might be a solution for you. A treadmill desk from Germany called Walkolution. Treadmill has curved shape and is powered only by you, so it moves in perfect sync with your rhythm. It features sliding integrated desk and backrest, so you can keep switching between postures easily throughout the day. It makes knowledge work much better suited for our physiology, so I'm delighted as we can now offer Walkolution desk treadmill for the listeners of this podcast with 10% discount. To get the discount, use code SITLESS, one word written together, in the store of walkolution.com. That is written walk as in walking and illusion like the second part of revolution or evolution. So walkolution.com, check it out, and let's continue with the interview.
And what would be if there's some people listening from human resources or managers that they would like to implement sedentary behavior reduction intervention in their workplace? What would be your main points for these people, take-home messages, how they should go about with the process?
That's a good question. And it depends on, I suppose, there's like practical considerations within each workplace. But people do tend to respond to tangible intervention strategies. So what we've seen within intervention research, workplace intervention research, is that environmental changes often exert the strongest changes on behaviour. So I've talked a lot about the height adjustable workstations, and they do tend to be or elicit the strongest and greatest changes to sedentary behaviour over time. So if you are able to deliver strategies such as that, or if you have a budget to deliver strategies, then they are shown to be the most beneficial. But my final intervention within my PhD research showed that there are ways to reduce sitting time without costly strategies like this. So delivering education sessions, self-monitoring, weekly emails, team leader support, and things like that, they can be built around to try and change that culture, and they can still have a positive impact on sitting time as well.
So you think that the most important would be to change the environment to enable. Do you see that you don't need the education if you have, for example, just the height adjustable desk? Is it enough in some cases just to provide the opportunity?
Well, typically research has shown that if you just give someone a workstation, yes, there may be a slight change, but without giving them some information and some context to why they've been given it, then the behaviour, it's not enough to just have the opportunity. So if we are more aware of the behaviours and the impact on our health, then we are more likely then to see the relevance of using that and integrating that into our daily activity. So I would say it's really important to combine the components.
And what kind of changes you were able to achieve with these employees in your project? What was it in 2 months, and what was it at 10 months?
So changes in sitting time were noticed at 3 months and at 10 months. We had 2 intervention groups, so we didn't have a non-intervention control group. There were greater changes within the intervention group that had a height adjustable desk to prolonged sitting over time. And importantly, we took a number of measures for sort of productivity and presenteeism using the work limitations questionnaire. So these are self-reported measures, but there was no detrimental impact on work outcomes or perceived work outcomes, which is really important. It's important impact information to feed back to employers that they sat less. They actually reported feeling better in terms of more motivation, less fatigued, and increased energy. And often within the call centre specifically, they tended to take, they said they built in patterns of sitting and using their desk around their interactions with their calls and customers. So typically if they had a stressful call, they would stand up and that would help to make them feel more confident and more assertive, and help them to feel more awake and alert as well. So there were really important impacts and perceived impacts. So I think that's really important as well. So we did measure things like cardio-metabolic changes, looking at blood triglyceride and blood glucose and cholesterol, and there were small beneficial changes, but the changes for individuals are the tangible ones where they feel like there are improvements. So I think those perceived changes were really important as well.
So you get quite a bit of positive changes in energy levels, some also in cardiometabolic risk factors, and the productivity didn't go down. And how was it for presenteeism and absenteeism?
Yeah, similar. There was no evidence of detrimental impact on these outcomes as well. So there wasn't a positive or overly positive impact, but there was no detriment. So we take that as a positive as well. So we were able to implement these strategies, change the behaviours without having a negative impact on these business metrics as well.
And what kind of business metrics did you use for the productivity? Was it the amount of calls, or did you actually track kind of the quality or success in the calls?
Well, I think that's definitely a consideration for future trials, because call and contact centres collect a wealth of this data. Call average handling time, average call duration, wrap time, things like that. There was a parallel economic evaluation that went alongside my study that did collect some of this information, but noticed no significant changes to that data either. The data that I collected in terms of productivity were self-reported measures. So it's definitely a consideration to include those business metrics within future trials as well.
And how do you consider you were able to achieve positive changes in health metrics? And I think probably quite many people, maybe the baseline health is not very good, so even small changes are quite beneficial. How do you see this kind of effects? What kind of effects could this kind of intervention have in the long term for this kind of people working in call centers?
So if behaviours is able to be maintained in the long term, then potentially there can be some beneficial impacts for cardiometabolic health. What we've tended to see, and within the literature, there is mixed evidence, and the latest meta-analysis shows that there are some beneficial impacts to these outcomes, particularly around insulin levels, blood glucose, waist circumference, and body fat percentage. But this is very varied across intervention studies. So there are potential for longer term behaviour change, but to date there is a lack of high quality studies with a duration of over 12 months. So there is a need for those kind of interventions and evaluations to happen.
And before we move to your current projects from your PhD study, would you like to add something related to this PhD study?
So we're delivering interventions with and without a height adjustable workstation can offer some benefits to behaviour changes. There were greater changes with the height adjustable workstation, although if you're looking for cost effective strategies, there are ways to build that in without using height adjustable desks. So there are different ways that you can go about it on small budgets, which may be useful for employers.
And how do you see in this wider framework on phase 4 it was wider implementation? Do you see that it would be possible to actually implement this kind of intervention in, for example, in all call centers in the UK?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't quite ready for the implementation phase following the PhD research, but what it has done is given a lot of information into how we can try to scale that up to address the wider implementation. The foundation phase, the development phase, looked at 4 call center call centres in the northwest. And then the next 2 studies looked at 2 different call centres as well. So there is some evidence that these strategies may be appropriate and may be feasible to deliver within contact centres within the UK settings. But there are certain lessons and things that we would need to tweak in order to optimise the effects before we get to that wider implementation phase. So I think before we jump to that stage, there's more that we need to do to build upon the intervention and enhance the effectiveness.
Thanks for joining us this week on Physical Activity Researcher Podcast. If you like the show, make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing or following the show on Twitter. This podcast is made possible by listeners like you. Thank you for your support. If you found value in the show, we would really appreciate a rating on Apple Podcast or whichever app you're using. Or if you would, in a real old school way, simply tell a friend about the show. It would be a great help for us. We have a fantastic lineup of guests for forthcoming episodes, so be sure to tune in. Thank you all for your support and have a great day.